My name is Ole Scheeren. I'm an architect, have worked since 30 years now, actually. The first project I started was exactly 30 years ago. Even before I started my studies, I got my first commission to build a project, which of course taught me a lot. And then it took me on a journey across 10 different countries in the world that I lived in, work in over 20, and now have offices in Hong Kong, Beijing, Berlin, London, collaborators in many other places from Bangkok to New York, and really a global practice with work in many different places. Yesterday I spoke about form follows fiction in a way as a counterpart to many other things that form could follow. Because I believe that while architecture has to fulfill many things simultaneously, of course it has to be functional, of course it has to address realities of economics, of course it has to deal with form and ugliness or beauty. But ultimately I think what really is the most important quality of architecture is what it does to the lives of people. And in a way, the stages we build for the lives of people, for the experiences, for the emotions. I believe architecture has a strongly emotional quality to it. We exist in spaces, we feel spaces. Spaces make us feel in certain ways. And I believe the fictional anticipation of that, of our lives in those spaces, is both an important goal for architecture, but also an important tool for the process of making it. First of all, I think fiction is indeed not fictive in the pure sense of the word. It is actually the fiction of reality, and I think this is a very important thing to understand. It is a speculative tool to anticipate reality, not to go off in dream worlds that have nothing to do with reality, but it is really acknowledging the reality of people's lives through anticipation, if you like, through a fictive narrative. I believe that that includes many important aspects. It of course also includes our position vis-à-vis the environment, vis-à-vis sustainability, vis-à-vis the things that both architecture but also us as human beings do to the planet. What I believe, however, is important is to not look at sustainability as a purely environmental or numeric concern. For me, a truly sustainable environment or a truly sustainable position vis-à-vis the world has to be a much broader understanding of what that means. It is not simply a carbon footprint. It is not simply the scoring in a green mark system. But it's really about the quality of life of people and how that quality translates into a responsible position vis-à-vis the environment. But if we create a world that is not great to live in, it cannot be sustainable by definition. I think many projects embrace exactly that position, but of course each project is somewhat unique in the way in which it addresses those concerns. If you look at the interlace in Singapore, it's a project that simultaneously looks at a collective quality of space, how we can create a space that is both individual but also connected, that allows people to choose between a multiplicity of environments that range from the very personal and private to the collective and public way of interacting with each other. At the same time, it brings the quality of nature into a project through, if you like, turning the base idea of vertical towers into the horizontal and stacking that up. I was able to achieve 112% green area of the site, so in a way multiply nature. Normally buildings take away from nature because they erase it, and in this case we multiplied nature. And what is important is this nature is not simply a formal gesture. It's not a decorative green wall, but it is habitat. It is habitable space, parks and gardens and rooftops for the inhabitants. And this is another important aspect for me, that we really think of architecture and of nature as habitat and not as an alibi of an image that we create to sell something. I don't believe any of these things are threats, because I think there are qualities in architecture that will continue to require the human mind, because actually we're making it for humans. And that connection, I do not believe will entirely get lost. I think if we look at the emergence of new tools, the computer per se, and now the metaverse at the further end of it, combined with artificial intelligence, these are all tools that I think indeed open many new possibilities and open new worlds. But I believe we have to be very careful to not think that these worlds would be their own means to an end. That they would be the final goal. But I think they're all aspects in a more complex understanding of the world we inhabit, and indeed can be tools to increase, if you like, the complexity and the interest in the various relationships we define in our world. But I believe it's important to understand them as tools, as I said, and as components of a larger reality that for me certainly will always include our physical presence and existence. The exhibition is called Spaces of Life because, of course, we want to talk about the life in our buildings, and we want to talk about the experience that you have with architecture. It starts with architecture as object. You can walk through a huge sculpture garden of giant architectural models that are no longer a kind of bird's eye view on an object, but actually become spatial devices for experience. We also want to talk about the process of making architecture, the ideas behind it, the ideas for their future. But we also want to show how architecture then lives in reality, what happens to architecture as it is being inhabited, or as it is being also consumed and somewhat reproduced through media, social media, many other parts. So these different aspects of architectural reality will be shown in a really large experiential environment that I hope can make architecture accessible not only to an audience of architects, but in a way to a wider audience of the general public that ultimately also lives in and with architecture.